Hey guys, welcome back to Real Housewives Recaps. Today, you guys, I am super excited. We're going to be talking about The Undoing. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you need to stop right now and go watch it because it's amazing. The Undoing is on HBO, I believe HBO Max, whatever their app is. It's a mini series. It's Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant, and it's a mini series. It's based on a book and 6 episodes. It's psychological thriller and it has me hooked. There's going to be 6 episodes of this thing. 2 episodes are out. It comes out every Sunday. I just discovered it. So I'm starting with episode 1. Episode 2 I'll put out really soon as well. Let's talk about the show. I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the characters because it's hard to keep them straight. So I just wanted to show you who is who so you know who I'm talking about. So this is Grace Frazier. She and her husband live in New York City with their son, Henry. She's a therapist. It looks like she mostly counsels couples. Who we spend the most time with through the series so far. We see things from her point of view and kind of get into her mind mostly. This is her husband, Jonathan, their son, Henry. Henry's the kid from Stranger Things. So Jonathan is a child oncologist. So they show his work and the way he handles, helping the kids. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see his work. This is Grace's dad, Franklin. He's kind of in and out. I'm only 2 episodes in. Very curious to see where he goes with this. He's a very wealthy man, and he seems to really love Grace, and not so much Jonathan. So this is Elena. I'm not going to say what happens quite yet, because you might want to stop it and go watch the show. But something goes on with Elena that really shapes the whole show. So she is an interesting figure. She, to me, she looks so much like Jennifer Lawrence with a dark hair. Okay, so now that you know the main players, let's get into what happened this episode. So they throw a lot at you right at the beginning. All you hear is this voice saying she's in her art studio, she's working. And a kid saying, why hasn't she come back? And we see this kid seeing something horrific, but we can't see what it is yet. Then we get a flash to 2 days earlier. So here's Grace Frazier. She's our main character here. She's brushing her teeth. She's wandering through her apartment. We get to see her interacting with her family. She seems to have a loving marriage with her husband. Again, he's a doctor, Jonathan. He's an oncologist. And they have a son. They have one son named Henry. Immediately we find out Henry goes to this very fancy school. And they even allude to it's a very expensive school, but her dad pays for everything. And so it's just kind of setting the stage. They have a really nice place. Extraordinary place in Manhattan, and they're doing very well. And again, they seem happy, all hunky-dory. Dad's walking Henry to school. They seem to have a really good relationship where they really love each other. Dad's being encouraging about Henry's violin and playing the violin, and he's encouraging him to stick with it. It comes up that Dad, Jonathan, has been... The son kind of alludes to, I've noticed you're not very happy lately, Dad, and Dad's kind of surprised to hear him say that. So then we see Grace at work. Again, she's a therapist, so she seems to be dealing mostly with couples. We see people talking about the relationships with her, and they make a point to show she's very good at her job. She can read people well, she pays attention, she's very smart. She kind of cuts through the BS and is able to call people out on their BS. So it's just interesting to see this side of her and, to learn more about this character in this setting. So after this session, we see her on the phone with her husband, Jonathan. She's reminding him that the fancy school has a fundraiser and the theme is fancy glam. He's not into it at all, but he says, you know what, I'll do it because you're hot. So we see that they have this playful relationship, and they seem happy together, and he's willing to go along with it. And they have to do a lot of stuff for this big fancy school, including right here, she goes to this committee meeting. So she goes into this fancy committee meeting, and she meets with the other ladies on the meeting. They're all very rich. They live in this very fancy apartment. But so this is where we first get to meet. Well, first of all, we meet her good friend here. Blonde is Sylvia, and she'll come up a little bit more as we get into episode 1 and 2. Then we meet Elena. This is the very first time we're meeting Elena. She has this very beautiful face and a very intense stare. She seems much younger than the other ladies. She's there with her brand new baby, and she and Grace just kind of gravitate toward each other. Interesting to see them throughout this committee meeting because they kind of keep looking at each other, and they have almost like a weird chemistry or something. They're kind of drawn to each other. I think they're both interested in one another, getting to know the other one. So during this meeting, everything is fancy and prim and proper, and Elena just pulls out her breast and starts breastfeeding her baby. And this seems to be a big deal with the other mothers. They all kind of judge her for it, but not Grace. So that seems to bond them a little bit more. That's kind of the take I got on it, but it was interesting to see everybody's reaction to what happened there. So after the meeting, we see Grace at home making dinner, and her friend, that blonde lady from the meeting, Sylvia, calls. And she says, "What is with Elena? She's being passive-aggressive by doing that." And she's saying that she's seen Elena before just sitting on the bench across from the school, just sitting and waiting for her son to come out. So she's noticed her before. She felt like it was weird for her just to be sitting there with the baby outside. So sometimes the show will just kind of jump away from Grace. So we do see a moment of Elena in bed with her husband, and she's just kind of awake. And then we jump right back to Grace in bed with Jonathan, and things seem much more relaxed and cozy. She's kind of talking about them moving out of New York and, maybe moving out of the city, and admitting that she's lonely. And he's kind of surprised to hear her say that. And he said she's the most New York person that he knows, and he can't imagine her living outside the city. And she's in the shower. He starts flirting with her. We see that they have a very sexual relationship. This comes up again later. So I think it's just showing that they do have a strong relationship, and, including sexually as well. So we see Grace the next day, and she's doing Pilates. She's at this big fancy gym. Afterwards she's getting changed. And who walks up? It's Elena, completely naked. And they show it all. Of course, I can't show it here, but Grace is kind of blown away by this. Elena seems super confident. They do these interesting shots, like I'm showing you here, where they just zoom in so close on Elena's face, and she has such a strong gaze. She really is like trying to connect with Grace, and Grace seems uncomfortable. She kind of gazes back. So I think they're doing that on purpose. It's really interesting to see. Elena is thanking Grace for making her feel welcome at the meeting, and says basically she's the only one that has been that nice to her. We see Grace and Jonathan. They are getting in their car. They're going to that fancy school party. She's telling him about the day and about the fully nude woman, and she was explaining there's some, weirdness going on. But I don't know. She felt like she was into it at the time. I'm not real sure, but they're going to this fancy party there for the fundraiser for the school. Jonathan is explaining that he has this conference early in the morning. He's got a very early flight, but he's going to try to hurry back, hopefully the same night, to be back with her and the son. So the school is Reardon, and this is the fancy event they're having to try to raise money for the school. Her dad, Franklin, is there, and this is the first time we really see him interact with Jonathan, and things are weird. He's just kind of short with him, and they just don't seem to like each other too much. So after that, they see Elena across the room, and she keeps staring at Grace. And some of the other ladies kind of notice and comment on it, that she's staring across the room at Grace. They see these other men walk up to her. They're kind of making snide comments about it. But it doesn't seem like she's into them. It seems like she's staring at Grace. We see the auction start up. They're making a big point to show how wealthy these people are. They're even having them bid on like a glass of water, thousands of dollars, to raise money for this school. I think it's to show how elite this school is, basically. So during the auction, Grace excuses herself to go to the bathroom. So this is somebody's apartment. I keep thinking it's an office building, but it's huge. But no, it's an apartment. She goes into this bathroom, and who does she run into? Elena. And Elena, she's walking in at the same time she's crying. And she says sometimes she feels overwhelmed and lost. And Grace says, listen, if you ever want to talk, she says, if you ever want to talk for free, please don't be intimidated. And then she realizes how that came off, adding the for free part, making it sound like, I know you can't afford it, so if you want to talk for free, I'm here. It was an interesting point that they added. So Grace is trying to explain, listen, the parents here can be a little, and then she trails off. She said, for the most part, they're kind and nice. And Elena says, you are the most kind, and that she can feel it. She says, it's true, I feel it. And Elena is crying and just kind of upset, and Grace can't seem to figure out why. So after they leave the bathroom, Grace sees that Elena is crying by the elevator. And we see an interesting moment here where Grace is about to head back to Jonathan, but she makes a sharp turn and ends up going in the elevator with Elena. And Elena is making an excuse to go home. She's saying she has to go pump. And Grace is being very nice to her and offers her driver. She declines, and Elena ends up kissing Grace on the mouth to thank her for her kindness. We kind of see an interesting moment there. So after that interaction, she's kind of shaken up. She ends up going back to meet up with Jonathan. He gets paged for a case, so she ends up having to be alone at the party. She's thinking about her husband, and this is another interesting thing that this show does a lot. When she thinks about him, we actually see into her mind what she's thinking. We see a glimpse of him at work. We get to see what it's like, what he's like with his patients. So then we see him later on. She's asleep. He climbs in bed with her, and she asked him how it went, and he starts to cry. And she asks what's happened, and he basically explains that he lost the child, that the child passed away. And so he's very upset. She's very upset. It's an interesting scene here because we see how deeply emotionally attached he is to his patients. We see how she reacts to it. They end up having sex. So again, it just kind of shows the bond in their marriage and, how they're reacting to all this. The other interesting thing we see is it jumps from their bed over to Elena's bed. And we see her husband by himself laying in bed, just kind of frustrated looking at the clock to see what's going on, where she is. So the next morning we see him taking care of the baby and trying to get their son off to school. And the son's like, where's mom? And, husband's explaining mom's at the studio. But we can tell husband's upset. We don't quite know what's going on. The son is like, okay, I'm going to go catch a bus. He goes like he's going to catch this bus. No, he takes off running. He hides from the bus to act like he's, not there. And we see him go over to his mother's studio. And then we cut back over to Grace and her family after it stops right here. And we cut back over. We see the difference over at Grace's house, her interaction with her son and getting him ready for school and, talking about Jonathan, the dad, and his upbringing, that sort of thing. Then we cut over to her at work. She's doing couples counseling with this couple. They're kind of getting heated. There's some infidelity issues, and they're really getting upset. And she's, helping them out and talking to them. But then all of a sudden, her phone buzzes, and they're like, do you need to get that? And she kind of explains, listen, I would never get this, but my son's school is the only one program to come through, so that way, if they need me, I can know about it. So she glances at the phone, but we really don't get a reaction out of her. It's after the couple leaves that we kind of find out something's happened. She's trying to focus on the couple, though. But her friend, the mom from the group, calls her, and she says, "Did you hear?" And Grace has no idea what she's talking about, and basically they said it's a family tragedy, and the friend explains it was Elena, that she was found dead, and Grace is just completely shocked. She says, "What happened?" And at first they heard it was an aneurysm, but now we're hearing she was murdered. And apparently her son discovered her. And Grace says, what do they know? And it seems like no one seems to know anything. They're looking for her husband. Evidently they were having problems. And then she's saying, could you imagine letting the son discover her like that? Grace is just completely shocked. And it's interesting because they flash kind of around in time a little bit. So it's like we get to see inside her head. She's flashing back to when she and Elena were talking. So we go back to current moment. We see Grace is walking her son to school, and the police are there at the school questioning different moms about how much they knew Elena, if they know anything that happened, to try to figure out, what exactly happened. We see them with all the different moms from the committee. Then we see Grace. She's calling Jonathan to check in at the conference, and she gets surprised by the police. So they end up going into her house, and basically they're asking her about Elena. She explains the committee where she met Elena for the first time, and they're asking what time she learned about the death. And she says she didn't learn until the text, and then her friend called her to talk about it. They ask how well she knew her, and when was the last time she saw her. She's saying it was last night at the benefit. They ask her about her husband, Jonathan. She explains that he's at a conference. They ask if her son knew Elena's son, and she said, no, I don't think so. They ask about the tuition, which I thought was interesting. They keep making a point to point out how expensive things are. The tuition for his school is $50,000 a year. They leave a card for her to call if she thinks of anything else that she needs to tell them. Henry comes home, and he's very nervous. He doesn't like that the police are there. He doesn't understand what's going on. But she ends up asking him if he knew Miguel, Elena's son. And it doesn't sound like he did. Henry asks if Elena's husband did it. And also asked if Mom knew Elena. So she kind of says, I knew her through, this charity committee. Then we see a flash, again, another rare time where they're not at Grace's house. They're actually interviewing Elena's son. And this is hard. They show a picture that I can't show here, and we find out Elena was so bloody. She's bashed with something, like disfigured in the face, basically. And we find out her poor son has had to walk in and see this. Grace calls Jonathan again that night and asks him to please call her. She really wants to talk about the day and what's going on, and hasn't heard from him and is kind of surprised. She sends a text, but then when she sends a text, she starts hearing a noise. So she goes to look in the nightstand, and sure enough, she finds his phone. So she's kind of freaked out by this, and she doesn't know what this means. She's looking for him. She doesn't know what this means. She's like, what? So then we see her calling hotels in the area where he was and asking for Jonathan Fraser. So she's making a whole bunch of phone calls, looking for him and kind of freaking out, wanting to talk to him and see what the heck is going on and to talk about the crazy day. At one point, they kind of trick us and they say, oh yeah, we have Jonathan Fraser. Hold on just a minute. And they connect her, and a woman answers. And she's panicked, and she's like, can I speak to Jonathan? Thinking that her husband's going to get on, but it's not him. It's a different Jonathan Fraser. So she hangs up, but she's still panicked because she has no idea what's going on and why she can't get a hold of him. And that is how that episode ends. So much happening in one episode. I cannot wait to see where this goes. I have so many thoughts and theories, and I'm very confused and very excited. And I just love Nicole Kidman. I think she's doing just such a good job in this role. I love whoever this actress is that plays Elena because she's weird but in a haunting way. I think she does a great job, and I just can't wait to see where this goes. I love thrillers. I love to read books like this. So I think I'm going to have to go back and read this book after I watch this series. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will be sticking with this. Most likely I will be covering it. So let me know what you think. Leave comments below and check back on my other shows. I have all kinds of other stuff going up, and I really hope you've enjoyed this. Leave me a comment or follow me on Twitter @RealRecaps. And thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.